So another important factor to consider in defining who counts as family in any given society is taking into consideration their system of descent. So a system of descent simply refers to the way that people trace kinship or trace relationships over generations. So for example, in the United States, our society uses what's referred to as a bilateral system of descent, which essentially means that we consider ourselves to be related to both of our parents' sides of the family, right? So for example, if you have a mother and a father, you probably consider yourself related to both your mom's side of the family and to your dad's side of the family, right? That's the way that we track descent in the United States. However, in other societies around the world, that isn't necessarily the case. For example, some societies practice what's referred to as patrilineal systems of descent, which means that you only consider yourself a descent or a relative to your father's side of the family, right? The flip side of that, other societies follow what's referred to as a matrilineal system, which means that when you're born, you only consider yourself a relative or a descendant of your mother's side of the family, right? So to us, this probably sounds a little bit strange or a little different, but remember, family is something that is socially constructed, meaning the way that family gets defined, who counts as family and who doesn't, is something that each individual society around the world gets to create or to socially construct, right? So our society recognizes the bilateral system, wherein we consider ourselves relatives or descendants of both of our parent sides of the family. However, other societies practice a unilateral system, where they only consider themselves related to one side of their family, either patrilineal system, where they only consider themselves related to their father's side of the family, or matrilineal system, where you only consider yourself related to your mother's side of the family. Let's talk a little bit now specifically about mate selection. So how do we choose the people that we pursue in intimate or romantic relationships? Well, despite our freedom of choice, right, hypothetically, we could choose any individual to be in a relationship with, right? But despite our freedom to choose, the vast majority of people practice what's referred to as homogamy, which is the union between people with similar backgrounds. For example, similar religion, similar race, similar class, or similar age, right? And now, the reason why the vast majority of us end up pursuing mates or pursuing relationships with people that are similar to us in terms of our backgrounds is largely a result of what's referred to as propinquity, which simply refers to geographic closeness. So in other words, we're more likely to date people or to court people who are similar to us because we tend to live in close geographic proximity to other people that are similar to us, right? So for example, I grew up in North Dakota. North Dakota is very prominently a white working class state. The vast majority of people living in North Dakota are white, and the vast majority of people in North Dakota come from working class, so lower to middle socioeconomic status backgrounds. So it's not surprising that for the first 20 or so years of my life, I was predominantly dating people who were also white and from working class families, because in that geographic area in the United States, that's what the majority of people are, right? And as you can see, this chart on the right here shows the most common ways people meet. And these are from the percentages of people who are currently partnered or in a relationship. All right, and you can see the most popular way, over 30% of people met through a friend. Many people met through meeting at a bar or a restaurant, meeting through a coworker, meeting through family member, meeting in school, meeting online, etc. And in all of these ways, almost all of these ways, right, you'd expect, oh, well, if I'm going out to a restaurant or to a bar to meet someone, or I'm meeting someone from school, you probably are living in the same geographic area, which again increases your likelihood of being of the same socioeconomic status as someone, of being of the same race as someone. Even religion, people of different religions tend to cluster in different geographic regions throughout the US, right? In the Midwest, where I came from, and even down here in the South, Christianity is very big. In the southeastern part of the states, deep South areas, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, West Virginia, Baptist and Protestant religions are very common. So you see that a lot of these shared cultural similarities with the people that we date are really a result of where we live and how we geographically end up locating ourselves in similar areas. A few other words on mate selection. Some cultures, specific cultures, really stress the importance of the practice called endogamy, which refers to marrying someone within the same social group as you. So some good examples of this, for example, people that identify as Catholic, it's a large component of Catholic culture that Catholics should marry other Catholics. Also Hispanic culture, a lot of times Hispanics have preferences that their children marry other Hispanic children. In some situations pertaining to socioeconomic status, parents want their children to be college educated and they prefer their children to marry other children who are college educated. So the opposite of endogamy is exogamy. And exogamy is the practice of marrying someone from a different social group. And this is becoming increasingly common in a variety of contexts in the United States today. For example, an example of exogamy could be a Muslim marrying a Jew, right? So two people from two different religious cultures marrying each other. Exogamy can also occur across race, right? So for example, an African American marrying a white person, right? That would be an example of an interracial relationship. So an exogamy in terms of race being from two different racial cultures. In 2015, 17% of newlyweds were in interracial marriages, and this statistic has continued to rise since 2015 and will likely keep on rising throughout future as more and more interracial couples come together. We see rises in the birth of interracial children, or children who refer to themselves as being multiracial. And so we likely will see an increased number in interracial marriages throughout the United States in the coming years. All right, let's start talking a little bit about love specifically. So from a sociological perspective, we typically talk about two different types of love. The first is romantic love. Now, romantic love is the type of love characterized by deep feelings of passion, melodrama, and excitement. Typically, this type of love receives a lot of media attention. So romantic love is the type of love that most people feel in the early stages of a relationship. So if you can think of a time when you met someone who you were really attracted to and you started dating, and think of how you felt during those first few weeks of dating, right? You probably had butterflies in your stomach every time you got a text message from that person. You got really excited every time you hung out. You probably spent a lot of time together, and maybe you spent nights at each other's house. Maybe you got really sad or felt really depressed whenever you had to leave that person, and that's because you were likely experiencing romantic love. When we meet someone for the first time and experience a romantic or sexual attraction to them, our brain releases the same kind of chemical compounds that it releases when you do drugs. Right? So you get a lot of these hormones being released in your brain that make you literally feel addicted to that person for the first time. And it results in these really strong feelings that we think of as falling in love, right? So when you hear the phrase falling in love, what people are actually experiencing is this romantic love. They're experiencing these really strong, intense desires for someone, not necessarily because they forged a really strong relationship with that person, but because your brain is releasing, like I said, this chemical cocktail, making you feel the same sense of addiction to that human being as you would to a drug, right? So this romantic love is typically the type of love that's often portrayed in a lot of the kind of fairy tale stories, right? Beautiful women being swept off by a knight in shining armor. Think of like Disney princess movies, the movie Pretty Woman, the TV show The Bachelor, right? Very heavily emphasizes this concept of romantic love, the idea of love at first sight, falling in love, the idea of having a soulmate and meeting that person for the first time are all heavily portrayed ideas of what romantic love is. People experiencing romantic love often focus solely on one another and block out the rest of society. So I'm sure many of you can probably attest to experiencing this either from firsthand accounts, or maybe I'm sure many of you have had a friend or a family member who, once they start dating someone for the first time, maybe they used to be someone that you talk to every day, but now all of a sudden you can hardly get a hold of them. They're not answering your phone calls, not replying to your text messages, and it's because they're literally spending every waking moment they possibly can with this new person that they feel like they're falling in love with. And again, romantic love is to blame on that chemical cocktail that your brain produces when you fall in love for the first time, the endorphins rushing to your brain, making you feel addicted to this person, like you literally can't get enough of them. However, once this kind of honeymoon phase of romantic love wears off, many couples often end up splitting or getting divorced. Now, there is no scientific formula to determine how long romantic love stage lasts. For most people, it tends to be a few months. For others, it can be a few years. And some people will continue to experience romantic love kind of cyclically, having its ups and downs for many, many years with the person, right? And that's because there is no one way that romantic love occurs. You know, you might have ups and downs in your relationship, and on those ups, you might feel like you're falling in love with your partner that you've been with for 20 years for the first time again, and release that same endorphin chemical cocktail in your brain that makes you experience these feelings of romantic love. But by and large, this initial experience of romantic love typically only lasts a few months, and that's when we start to see a lot of relationships separate, is when this romantic love fades, the chemical cocktail in your brain, isn't as strong as it was before. All of a sudden, you start to kind of lose that addictive feeling to that person, and you end up breaking up as a result. Let's also talk about concepts of love. So the other love type that we heavily refer to is companionate love. Now, companionate love is a type of love that grows stronger and stronger with time, and it's heavily based on commitment and friendship, trust and respect for the person that you're with. So if you can survive the romantic love stage of your relationship, right, those first few months where it's easy to love someone because you're like addicted to them, after that, you have to either transition into companionate love, hopefully, right, where you actually develop meaningful feelings for that person beyond just that initial sexualized romantic attraction, or the relationship, like I said, tends to break up. Companionate love develops and intensifies as partners come to understand one another, and those experiencing companionate love may also simultaneously experience romantic love, so that's important to note as well. Like I said, romantic love can kind of ebb and flow throughout the course of a relationship. Companionate love, once you get to that level, if you get to that level, tends to remain pretty static throughout the relationship unless some sort of trauma occurs that derails the relationship. A recent survey asked people what are the top 5 features that you associate with love, and you can see people listed trust, care, honesty, friendship, and respect as the top 5 features. And it's interesting that these came on the top 5 of the list because these features are all heavily associated with companionate love, whereas if features of romantic love tend to be more based off of lust, physical attraction, things of that sort. So you can see when people are asked to think about love, they most commonly associate features of companionate love, even though it's romantic love that is most frequently displayed in TV programs and mass media. So based on these concepts of love, would you say that contestants on reality TV shows such as The Bachelor, or if you're a little more old school like I am, shows like I Love New York or The Rock of Love that were featured on MTV as kind of spin-offs of The Bachelor, are they experiencing romantic or companionate love on these shows? Well, the answer, of course, is that they're really heavily based on romantic love, right? This premise that you can actually meet someone and fall in love with them in a matter of just a few weeks and decide whether or not you want to get married to that person is really kind of a far-fetched idea because it takes much longer to develop that companionate love type, building trust and respect in an individual beyond just physical attraction.